we are here for the Disrupting Pattern lecture series that you know, of course, and we have this open talk that is in presence and, of course, online. Super happy, of course, because this time there is an illustrator, also an architect, we can say, and I do the bureaucratical part, and then
yes,
I leave
of course.
you for,
I'm so happy that you do it.
So, of course, you're born in Italy. Right now, you're living in Berlin, right? You have studied here in Milan, a polytechnic school, so you start exactly as an architect. But then you follow your passion, that is drawings.
Exactly.
I asked him to present his work because he has a completely particular point of view regarding the city and the space around us. He used to work, of course, for different brands. He used to work also as a freelancer for personal work. That is a really good part. And some of the clients you work with, there is really a lot, is La Repubblica. So we have a magazine, newspaper, Cartier, Vanity Fair, Bompiani, Rizzoli, theater, like Piccolo Teatro di Milano, also Greenpeace magazine. So any kind, of brands. Because the important thing is try to maintain your point of view and pass a message to people. That's why also we can say that you have a transdisciplinary approach. That is the approach of Domus, and that's why it's open to all the masters. So thank you very much, Carlo.
Thank you so much,
We can start with the talk, and then after we have a Q&A session, and so we can chat a little bit together. Grazie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here because I feel the creativity here and I am working with creativity. So it's beautiful also to share what I do because my work is exactly to share what I do because I don't keep everything in my drawers, but my work is to publish all the things that I realize. And it's beautiful for me, it's important to start from the idea of the diamond. The diamond is a particular character in ancient Greek culture that has a very important meaning for creative people because the diamond is, let's say, a kind of representation, the metaphor of the destiny, the reason why we are on earth and we are living here, the best part of us. For ancient Greeks, it was like a kind of little, let's say, God living on your shoulders or inside on you and concentrating all the values, all the positive characteristics of you. So it's very important for me to discover your best skills, what you can do better in your life. So the first place where you can find the diamond is in your childhood, for example, in your drawings. This is a drawing I made when I was between 11 and 12. And it was already possible to see many characteristics of my work today. So if you have some drawings or something you made when we were very, very young, you can go back and see and try to discover all these things that are so fundamental, so basic for your work. It was a pirate island with many details and many different things, animals, people sleeping, prisoners, and all those. So many, many things. It was all about fantasy, details, architecture. So everything was already detectable in this first work. Inspirations, of course, in the history of an artist or an illustrator are very, very important because at a certain point we need a booster, something that is pushing you to create something and is telling you how to go on and is giving you the energy. The first thing, one of my first passions I met as a child was architecture. And the Pantheon in Rome was the temple I visited when I was 8 years old. And I was so impressed by this incredible dome with this opening to the sky I remember the date, it was raining inside the temple, and it was amazing for me because the floor was like a basin and all the water was collected in the center of this floor. And as a child, it was something, so what I've never seen, a roof open like this on purpose. So when at the end of this visit, I decided to be an architect because I discovered a kind of freedom also in projecting building, completely different from the other normal building we used to see every day. And the other big encounter in my life was with Bruno Munari. I was just graduated in architecture at the Polytechnic of Milan, and I had a big honor to work with this great designer, teacher, professor, artist, and whatever. We cannot stop to define Bruno Munari. I have learned mainly creativity from Bruno Munari because creativity is something we don't consider so much every day. Also in school, sometimes it's something that is a little bit hidden. And when we are, for example, children, we can be a little bit unlucky sometimes and meet professors or teachers who tell you, okay, now you have to draw, I don't know, a sheep, you have to draw an horse or something. They give a theme to develop, but they don't set you free. And it's very important to find a method, like Bruno Munari's method, to be able to develop in a very free way your own creativity, and creativity is actually your diamond. After I was, over the years, I was working as an architect in Milan. I was building office buildings, and for me it was very hard because I had a big problem with bureaucracy in Italy. I realized that I was creating, drawing just for a 20% of the whole time of my working time. And so at a certain point, I really gave up and I decided to be just an illustrator. I already was working as an illustrator with La Repubblica when I was younger. And I considered carefully everything. At the end, I had also to go to psychotherapy to understand better myself, to tear out my diamond, and to understand what was my real passion. And I realized that to be an illustrator means to work with your passion, so drawing, but at the same time, you also need a content. And the content in this case was architecture, cities, travels. So I was able at a certain point in my life to put together all these passions in one, let's say, dream job and create something that was able really to satisfy my diamond, the real part of myself. This was a very important step in my career. It was Moleskine Publishing called me and they told me, okay, come to Milan, come to our office. I would like that you could do something for us, whatever you want. And I say, oh, it's incredible. It's very difficult that someone tell you, do whatever you want for us. So I decided to think about something that it was really a dream for me, the best for me. And I decided to put together this content, architecture, cities, and drawing. So my proposal was a book series about cities. So of course, we started from Milan because Moleskine is in Milan. In 2015, we had the expo here. And so I started to present these storyboards to Moleskine and Publishing. And you see, there are always these double pages with different things that are part of the real identity of Milan. Because as we start from our diamond as our real identity, I'm very interested in identity, also cities, if you want to discover, to know really well a city, you have to dig, to deepen these cities, until you find its identity. And so I started to consider cities like people. Every city is a person, and you can speak with this person, try to hear to this person, and listen to this person, and try to develop your impression about this person. Try to translate the speech that you have with this, let's say, friend city that is in front of you with a cup of coffee, and try to translate all this speech in illustrations, in drawings. So these are the first sketches I made about Milan. You can recognize many things. Also, design objects, for example, it's a very important part, as you know very well, of the Milanese identity. And I started with the first books. This is I Am Milan. Then I went on with I Am London. We started this book series, then I Am New York. It's of course very beautiful because you can also travel a lot, because it's very important to be there in person when you make all these sketches, because you have to breathe the air of the city, you have to hear the noise of the city. If you are in Manhattan, for example, you have a continuous noise, like being in a machine, boom, boom, boom. Every city have different smells, different noises, different street furnitures, different street signs. The identity is not just in architecture, but it also, for example, we will see later, in how people wear in these cities, the fashion that is typical of these cities. The line was always a very important start for me. At the very beginning of my work, when I decided to be an illustrator, I remember all the teachings by Bruno Munari, because Bruno Munari, for example, he made in his workshops one exercise like this. So you have to take, for example, a flat tip pen, a pencil, or I don't know, a pen, a normal pen, a brush, and trying to find out your line, your favorite line. So you proceed to create many parallel lines, vertical lines like this, and at the end you can find the line that is your tool, your own tool, and it seems really silly, a little bit stupid, but it's really useful to find your real line, and maybe you can do it even in the digital world, on a tablet, on a digital tablet, for example, because also there you can try to realize different lines. And so I started to use these lines that are, I realized, by rotring pen, that is a technical pen. In the past, architects use a lot these rotring pens on tracing paper, on transparent paper. And yes, this is the line I decided to use through this exercise. This is a former brewery in London. This is, you know very well what it is, the Galleria in Milan. This is from the book I Am Milan. And also this has been made by hand and then scanned. And then I decided to work a little bit on the lights. And everything is on a different layer. For example, the people you see there in the rain, they are on a different layers. It's like somehow working on a stage. They are the characters of this drama or comedy or whatever, and the background, the scene, is the gallery. Most of the time I consider my illustrations like a theater, as an Italian, or like an opera scene. This is the gallery inside, still here with this ink line. This is Venice. This is a very, very big work I made for an event in a palace in Venice, so it's 6 meters wide. This is Milan. Everything also here have been created on different layers, like this building, for example, in foreground, and then the other buildings here, here, and here are on different layers, because I like to play a little bit when I have these drawings in Photoshop to shift on the right, on the left, to play with them. And this is always very important for the clients, because when I deliver one of these files, because at the end they are files, maybe the client can say, I would like to I don't know, get rid of something I don't like. I would like to shift something to the left or to the right, and it's still possible. Otherwise, I should go back and draw everything again. So it's very important for me to use layers in Photoshop. This is Paris, is another view of a city. All the monuments are exactly in this position compared to the central Place des Vosges. That is a zenithal view here. And with this drawing, for example, by using this simple line, I wanted to show that every city is a planet on its own. Paris, of course, is a planet. They have a very special slang compared to the land. And they have a behavior that is different. They have a vision of the world that is different compared to other cities, other kind of fashion, other kind of everything. Architecture is a unique planet. Layers, as I told you, it doesn't go on. Okay, it doesn't work on. Are so important. Also here we see something that is colorful. In this case, this is a work I made for MTA in New York. That is a Metropolitan Transportation Authority. And you see that in this case, the city is expanding itself also underground. Normally we see the city outside, but of course here you can read many different floors underground. I went to see the metro in New York, and I had to consider also how is the fashion there, how the people are dressed in the underground, all the differences they show, and it was really a nice work. And the MTA sent me all the models of these trains, because I had to depict exactly these trains as they are, these models of the trains. Yeah, it was a very, very funny work with a lot of fantasy, because if you see here, you have a crocodile. A crocodile is a part of some kind of legend in New York. They thought that there are crocodiles in the underground. Here again, layers. I made many different drawings. This is another district in New York near the Flatiron building, and these are water tanks on the buildings. And so, for example, in this case, I made sketches of these water tanks, and then I scan just these sketches. Then I scan on separate piece of papers other elements like this sketch, this building behind it, the other building behind. So there is a dialogue between foreground and background. And also here, once I have everything in the digital world, in Photoshop, I can work with these things and decide every time a different position. Because it depends. If you are on a balcony and you try to observe this cityscape, everything changes if you move your head. We are used to see our famous Renaissance Italian art as seen from a window. The frame is like a window, and everything is just seen by a person that is standing there still in front of this window. But for example, in Asian culture, in Chinese or Japanese culture, you don't have this still perspective with one vanishing point. But if you see one of these Japanese prints, for example, or Chinese prints, you can see that there are many different vanishing points. It's like to see a film. It's not like that, but you have many different, let's say, pictures in one big pictures. So this is another case where I used, this is a print, it's not a drawing, because I made every line, every row houses, or every, let's say, block on a different piece of paper. And then in Photoshop, I decided to put one on the other to create this perspective. So it was able, for example, to get rid of this, or to erase this, or to change them somehow. This is the city in London with St. Paul's Cathedral, always using the same line created by rotring pen. And this is the same color with color that also here are on different layers. So also all the shadows that are transparent layer is, according to my method, a different layer that I can change. So I also can change light. I also can change the atmosphere of the time during the day. It's a very long process, of course. This is not very clever because maybe when you have to do an illustration for newspapers and then need this illustration in 2 days and sometimes also in a few hours, and unfortunately sometimes it's the weekend, so you have to stop if you want to do it and dedicate yourself to the weekend time. Of course this method is very long, but now I'm a little bit faster because after many years I have learned how to do, and I found out a trick to be faster, and I will tell you. This is perspective, of course. We were speaking about perspective before. It's very important when you show cities, of course, because cities are made by buildings and they are made by many different perspectives, like in this case. Or in this case, this is just a sketch, but the perspective here is very important because it is the protagonist of this sketch. It is a very simple sketch. We have just a building made in watercolors, and then we have this very rough doodle, this bridge in the foreground. But it's just these lines are able to describe the distance from this building to the viewer. Here, this is a fantastic sketch. It was just an idea. It doesn't exist, this place, of course. It's New York, but it's New York just as I see New York. It was an attempt to find the identity of New York by putting in just on one page many different elements that are contributing to create this identity, like very particular signs that you can find just in New York, the traffic lights, street lights, and iconic building over there. These buildings, these skyscrapers are not all together there, of course. It's just a fantastic way to see. And of course, perspective is a very important element because I consider perspective a very strong characteristic when you have to describe city. This is in Williamsburg, New York. And I used a lot of transparency. We will see later what is transparency for me. You see that many things are just sketched here, and you can see all the things behind, because these are just all these lights, all this technical stuff is made just as sketches, very fast sketches. And this is the same sketch colored, where I decided to add trains and also a section of this train with people inside. Very typical New Yorkers. If you go closer, you could see, count, and see and meet these people inside this train. Also here, as you see, the perspective is very important. In this case, I decided to keep all the colors stronger when they are closer to the viewer, and lighter, just like behind the mist, behind the fog over there. This is something you can find, for example, we have learned from Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci used to describe the landscape like this. When you have hills very far away, the color is very light because the density of air is stronger and stronger, of course. When you have a hill in this landscape closer to you, it is more defined, you can read it better, you can see it better. And also in this case, perspective is a very important part of this illustration. I use also these cables in the sky to subline the perspective. Of course, I could say for every illustrations we don't have the time because it would be maybe also boring, but I could say a lot of things because, for example, all this part, it's working like a mirror, and it is, of course, another layer. It's everything, it's separated. This taxi is a layer, the other van is another layer, everything. So it's really a big work. And also all the cables are other layers. So it's crazy somehow. I work a lot during the night because I don't have telephone calls. I can go ahead and nobody can stop me. This is another case where perspective is very important. This is a bridge in New York, Queensboro, and it's beautiful in cities to draw bridges, like in this case, London, because bridges are for architects and in general have been always considered just like something magical because they don't have continuous basement, but they are like somehow floating in the air. We in the ancient time, Roman called the emperor for the part or his religious, let's say, management role, pontifex. And also we today call pontefice the Pope, because pontifex means originally the one who is able to create bridges. Because all the engineers who were able to create bridges were considered somehow like magicians, people connected with gods, with something magical, because it was so difficult technically to create bridges compared to normal buildings. This is another perspective. Of course, New York has very, very long and far perspectives with very, very far vanishing points. People are always very important to describe. You cannot, it's very difficult to depict New York without people because it's always overcrowded. And this is interesting because I realize, of course, speaking about perspective also here, this dramatic perspective is a very important part of this illustration. Otherwise, it would be quite flat. But it's interesting because this museum, the Guggenheim Museum, it's something that here I decided not to draw. We have just these lines here, but here is white, is the white page, the white piece of paper, and I just made by pencil this shadow here and here, but you see there is no roof, nothing, it's just a few lines. We are speaking about a few lines made by watercolored and then scanned and re-elaborated inside a Photoshop program. Also here we have this perspective with the Empire State Building and people and shadows, and once again everything is on different layers. And I like very much to use these sketchy lines, not to go too much into the details because it's going to be too boring sometimes. Details, there are another part of my language, I prefer to say language and style. You see this is the spire in the Empire State Building, and it's actually full of antennas for handies, for mobiles, It's incredible because you cannot see it when you are there because they are so small, and it's incredible. It's like a forest when you are close by. This is a sketch about Times Square in New York, and this is the final work that was also animated later, and you can see many things that you can realize that you are really in America. You realize at the end that in the mirror, in the rear mirror, you can see Mickey Mouse, that is the passenger of this taxi. This is Berlin, seen from above for Goethe Institute. Also here the details are very important. Of course, these are big posters. In this case, it's very big, so you can discover many, many things. And details, for me, are very important, as you have seen already in the first drawing I have shown you before. Transparency is another way I like very much to show cities, because cities are made by buildings that are hiding the other buildings behind. So in this case, we are in Via Torino in Milan, and this is a wonderful church created by Bramante, San Satiro, and Santa Maria presso San Satiro. But we have these two buildings in front of it. So I decided to show this church, the facade of this church also behind, and I turned these buildings as a transparent building, into transparent building. It's quite strange because we are not used to see transparent cities, but it's like, it's more about the time. It's just like if I consider two different moments of a visit, when I was in the street and I was inside the little square in front of the church. And so if I combine this different time, I can find, I can see at the end this vision in my mind. This is another sketch. This is in Porta Romana, Scalo di Porta Romana. And this is the final, where I decided to add more layers and to use once again this idea of transparency, because here we have a building, but I decided to describe this building just through very fast lines, in this case orange lines, to create a stronger contrast with the other colors. And also the cars normally are moving, so somehow they are there, but also they are not there anymore after a while. So I decided in this case to do them less massive but transparent, because they are moving. And shadows, of course, are very important. Sometimes shadows can describe alone something, one building. For example, on this side we have just a very fast rough sketch, and it's just the shadow that is describing the line, the silhouette of this building. And of course, through light and shadows, you can describe a particular moment of this city during the day. You see that everything is quite sketchy, and I tend to be somehow more sketchy, with more and more. I pay attention to details, but at the same time, this is the trick to do everything faster. I just use my first sketch. So I don't trace the sketch with the ink on the pencil, but I found that somehow the sketch can be fresh, can have, can express a spontaneity that you cannot find in the final illustration, that sometimes is to somehow make up. Also here, the shadows are very important. This is a fantasy about the Guggenheim Museum, where the artworks are living during the night when nobody is there. And this is a book I presented just a few days ago, Interni di una psicoterapia, Interiors of a Psychotherapy, where once again shadows and light are very important. because in this case, in these 8 drawings I made for this book, you start your path in your psychotherapy, and of course you start from a situation that is somehow in the obscurity, because you go to the psychotherapy the first time because you have problems, you don't feel well. And so I started from, in this research of your identity and your wellness, I decided to use this ray of light to describe this shift to a better situation. And the better situation is very sunny, it's full of light. So you start from somehow a contrast between light and darkness. And I go on where everything is here the light is more artificial somehow. Of course, it's full of metaphors, so it would be very long to describe all this. Illustrations are completely crazy, but they have a meaning on the psychological side. Also, this is a lapsus, for example, but the light every time is more and more and more. You see also the shining tiles here because the light is coming from this window. So also describing interiors means speaking about cities, because of course cities have a lot of interiors. More light, more light, more light, also here light. And of course every time I like to put pieces of designs I love, particularly like this from Ettore Sozza's, this Ultra Fragola, this mirror, or this lamp, Tolomeo by Michele De Lucchi, and many other things. And this is the last illustration where you have the full light of the summertime, and you have the need at the end of the psychotherapy to go back to life. So to go outside and afford your new life. People are also very important to describe cities, because I told you before that to consider the different ways people were in every city are very important, because they are part of the identity of the city, and also the colors are changing in every city. In some city, for example, I noticed that they were mostly in black. In other cities tend to be more colorful somehow. So it's very important to observe these things in the city. You can see all these people in London, in Soho, more somehow closer. I made these people just with watercolor, and I decided to scan them. Here, always in London, this was a typical coat I've seen in London. In London, they are very creative, I think. In other cities, they follow more a standard fashion. In other cities, they are very, very creative. And these are people in Central Park in New York. In this case, I decided to use a kind of style that is more connected with comics and pop art, because New York is a very important city. Of course, it was shaped by pop art, and so somehow these characters are more pop. It was I always have a lot of fun. It's important to have fun when you illustrate, when you work, because it means that everything is going to the right direction, because otherwise something is wrong. When you start to be a little bit bored and you see, you feel that something is wrong, the final result could be not so satisfying. The unfinished is for me very important, because most of the cities are always developing themselves. They are actually unfinished. And the sketch is the tool, for me, the most important tool to describe this situation that is never completely finished. This is another sketch I made for Molteni in Milan. This is crazy because there are buildings inside this architectural studio, and The furniture are outside. This is Aldo Rossi's studio in Milan. They have exactly this window and these elements that are typical from Aldo Rossi paintings and drawings. And this is the Cimitero Monumentale, Monumental Cemetery in Milan. Here, step by step, I was able to rediscover the importance of using sketches instead of final illustrations. So it was, for me, really a big pleasure to realize that, okay, my work is finished now, for me it's fresh, it's perfect. It tells me exactly what I wanted to express. And I don't have to trace everything with an ink line, so I save a lot of time. So it was one of the tricks I used to save time, but always keeping a good quality of work. And this is another sketch I made just 2 weeks ago, describing for an advertising campaign in Istanbul. Also here, everything was on different layers, even smokes, even shadows, the mosque behind the other mosque and everything. So, but it's all just pencil made. So it's a sketch. This is Las Vegas. I made partly in pencil, partly in inks, especially this signs. This is London. Also, this is a sketch. This is New York, with many typical things describing the identity of New York. And once again, it's very important to be there, to be in the street, to depict everything. It's very, I think you could understand the difference between something that it was made considering just some photos you can find in Street View or in the internet, and to be really there. It's completely different. This is a mix I made between, this is for the, a German newspaper, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and this is a mix between a sketch, that is this part, the carpet, the seats, the pictures on the wall, everything is just a sketch I made. And then I decided to color it, to use shadows, once again the importance of shadows, and then to use ink and something more defined to describe this transparent, another thing that I use often, this transparent table and chairs, to create more contrast. And fantasy. Fantasy is very important. This is an illustration I made for Repubblica to speak about the book fair in Turin. And Turin is a city that has very particular building and palaces, and there are exactly like this, with this kind of windows and architectural characteristics that are typical just of Turin, but it was nice to give you the idea that Turin is very connected with books, especially in this time of the year. Fantasy here, this is from Italo Calvino, Le Città Invisibili, that is, well, of course, a book every architect knows. A lot of fantasy also here, and a combination between sketches and ink lines. It was very nice to create this, and yes, it's probably full of psychological interpretation, and I don't know. Also here was very nice to work on different layers, because you can combine in different combination all these elements, architectural element. And also there is a kind of collage, because this is a page with the line of a notebook, for example, because I made this, this building on a notebook page, and I decided to cut this page like this, scan it and put inside illustration. This is just a fast sketch I made. And yes, it was fun. It was like to take a sketches notebook, to cut all the pages and put everything together. Also here I used fantasy to describe the energy of New York City. Here you see the shadow of this panther roaring among these skyscrapers, and I wanted to express this idea of big energy. Here is another fantastic view of the city. It was a very warm summer, so I needed a swimming pool. I made it like this. This is my kitchen, and I imagine my kitchen in Berlin like in a tropical situation, so completely different from Berlin. And it was very nice to use, once again, transparency, light, shadows, colors, and everything here, once again, is on different layers. A client asked me to create a portrait of Dante Alighieri, and I decided to use the city because I speak about cities and architecture, and I am specialized in this somehow. And so I decided to use the city, in this case, the Florence of the time of Dante Alighieri, to describe his face, because Florence was very important, of course, for him. And it's very deep. It was a very deep part of his identity. Here you see all these devils flying away from the head and actually describing the hood, Dante Alighieri's hood. Here you have a field, but actually they are describing the vest of Dante Alighieri. And back to Munari, in the last years, I went back to consider Munari's method in teaching creativity. And I create this notebook for Moleskine Foundation. I decided to use this notebook not just the base for our sketches and drawings, but in this case, the notebook is the protagonist. So you can see that the notebook itself, it was cut, and it's the city somehow. You can open this Japanese kind of notebook and see all the city at the end, with a skyscraper coming out, exploding out from the pages. And this is according to Bruno Munari's method. When I do some workshop for children, I decide, for example, to take a blank page and rip it off in a random way. So you have the white page here, you have this random shape, and every child can decide to interpret it in a different way, this strange shape. It could be a mountain, for example. It could be the face of a snake. I decided, for example, on myself to do a lion, but it could be many, many different things. And then in this workshop, we developed this browsing the pages in different ways. We decided to create a city, for example. Step by step. The other thing that is very interesting for an illustrator is that your images can be used for different purposes. For example, in this case, we have a bus in Berlin. They asked me to decorate completely with illustration for children. It's 150 square meters that I made in a digital file. Of course, I created in a digital file, and this is the film they put on the bus. Of course, it was a very. So this is a kind of usage. Another kind of usage, for example, here in Milan, I create these drawings that is actually a billboard. You see there that is 23 meters by 23 meters, so it's a completely another kind of dimension. Or, for example, postcards. So these are the same illustration that I create. I produced on a very high resolution, so they can be adapted to different sizes. And here we have New York again, a very pop New York, and it should be animated because we have many, you see, for example, helicopters, but Superman there, and then Godzilla, they're coming out. Because New York is also this. You could not do something like that for an European city, for example. New York was the stage in many films, in a popular culture, for this kind of tales. It's going on. Okay, good. This is an animation we created from my illustrations, using the layers of my illustrations for a big animation that is shown at Malpensa Airport in Milan. So it's like a welcome for the people who are coming to Milan in Malpensa. We created this with Milan Airport and Digital Culture Center in Milan. This is again the same. And here again, this is another view of Milan. I cannot show to everybody all the film because it is possible just at Malpensa Airport, so I have to choose among a few shots. This is or also this one. This is San Lorenzo alle colonne. And the last one, this one, you can realize the size of this presentation in Malpensa. So we close with Milan, and I am available for your question to reply from. Thank you.